drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes, and I didn't turn on the radio once. Not because I was upset, I just needed to think. It had been 3 weeks since my brother's engagement party, the one where my mother pulled me aside near the coat closet and said, very quietly, like she was telling me the weather, that she and my father had decided Theo and his fiancée would be moving into my old bedroom. Which was fine. That room hadn't been mine since university. What wasn't fine was what she said next. We were also thinking, and we've talked about this with Theo, that your apartment downtown would really make more sense for the two of them. It's closer to his office. You're remote, sweetheart. You can work from anywhere. I remember looking at her champagne glass, the way the bubbles were rising in it, steady and oblivious. That's my apartment, Mom. You've been there 4 years. It's time for something new, don't you think? She smiled like she'd just suggested a haircut. My name is Wren. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been a senior data architect at a cybersecurity firm you've definitely heard of. I won't say the name. What I will say is that I work remotely, I bill at a rate most people don't quote in polite company, and I've been very, very careful about who knows that. Not out of shame, out of experience. I grew up in Mississauga, second of 3 kids. My brother Theo is 4 years older than me and has been my parents' golden child since the day he drew a hockey stick in crayon and my father framed it. My sister Petra is 2 years younger and has been the baby since before she was born. I was the one in the middle, the one who studied quietly, who didn't need much, who could be counted on to figure things out herself. When I was 9, I was in the hospital for 6 days with a ruptured appendix. I missed the beginning of the school year. My father missed a work conference in Vancouver because of it. I know this because he mentioned it, not once, not twice, but at intervals throughout my childhood, in the particular tone men use when they want you to know something without technically saying it. I cost them. That was the message, not in those words, but in the 10,000 small ways a family can make one child feel like a line item on a balance sheet. I paid my own way through university. My parents co-signed a student loan and I paid it back before I graduated, ahead of schedule, without telling them. I got a job before I had my diploma. I leased my apartment in downtown Toronto, a 1-bedroom on the 14th floor with a window that faces east and floods with light every morning, and I furnished it myself, piece by piece with my own money. They didn't know what I made. They thought I did computer stuff. My mother once described my job to her friend as, she works in IT, like a help desk kind of thing. I let her believe it. It was easier. It was safer. When you've spent your life being the one who costs too much, you learn to keep your accounts private. After the engagement party, I didn't say anything to my mother. I just nodded and told her I'd think about it. Then I drove home, made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my laptop for a long time. On the screen was a folder I'd been building for 8 months. Spreadsheets, correspondence, a timeline I'd started keeping almost as a joke, and then kept updating because the pattern kept getting worse. My parents had been borrowing from Theo's joint account with me, a legacy account from when we were kids that I hadn't closed because it held a small respite my grandmother had set up. The amount was modest. The principal was not. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it came 2 weeks after the party, on a Tuesday morning when I was on a call with a mortgage broker named Deirdre who worked out of an office in Etobicoke. Deirdre had reached out because my name had come up on a pre-approval application for a property in Brampton that I had not applied for. I asked her to repeat that. She did. My name, my SIN, my income listed on a co-borrow application alongside my father's. The income listed for me was $340,000. I do not make $340,000. I make more than that. But whoever had filled out that form had taken a number and inflated it and signed my name to a document I had never seen. I told Deirdre to stop the application immediately. I told her I had not authorized anything and that I would be following up in writing. I kept my voice very level, the way I'd trained myself to, the way you have to when you work in a field where panic is a liability. I hung up and sat very still for about 4 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I want to be honest about something. I didn't go looking for revenge. That word has always felt too hot for what I actually did. What I did was more like accounting. Someone had made a series of decisions that affected me without my knowledge or consent, and I was going to make sure that every one of those decisions had a consequence that matched its size. The mortgage fraud was the most urgent thing. I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Adaze, and she had the kind of calm that comes from having seen everything. And she confirmed what I already suspected. My father had forged my signature on a co-borrower application, inflated my income, and used my credit profile to secure a property purchase I knew nothing about. In Canada, that's not a gray area, that's fraud. It falls under the criminal code, and it also constitutes a reportable offense to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. Adaze asked me how I wanted to proceed. I said I wanted to wait. She looked at me. Not forever, I said, just for the right moment. The right moment, as it turned out, would require a small setup. My parents had been asking me with increasing frequency for money, not in direct terms, it was always wrapped in something. The house needed a new furnace. Theo's wedding venue had a deposit due. My mother wanted to take a trip to Portugal as a family, and the flights were just so expensive right now, you know how it is. Could I help out just this once? Just a little? I had always said yes. Small amounts, regularly, the way you'd feed a parking meter, not because you love the meter, but because the alternative is worse. After the phone call with Deirdre, I said yes to one more request. My father called me on a Thursday and said he needed $18,000. He said it was for a business opportunity. A friend of his had a stake in a property development near Barrie, and if he could get in on it, the return would be significant. He said he'd pay me back double in 6 months. I said, let me think about it. I spent the weekend setting up a numbered company through my corporate lawyer. She asked me what I wanted to name it. I told her Northfield Capital Holdings. She filed it with the Ontario Business Registry that Monday. On Wednesday, I called my father back and told him I could help, but that I wanted to do it properly, through my company, as an investment with paperwork. I told him I had a business manager named Petra. I used my sister's name on purpose, as a small private joke, who would send over the documentation. He said that was great. He said I was really coming through for the family. I sent the documents. They were very clear, very specific. They outlined in legally binding language that the $18,000 was not a loan but an equity purchase. That Northfield Capital Holdings, my company, would hold a stake in any property or financial instrument my father used the funds for. That in the event of default or misrepresentation, the full recovery rights passed to the holding company. That any income or assets connected to the investment could be subject to review. There was also a clause, buried in Section 11, which nobody reads, that authorized Northfield Capital Holdings to pursue legal remedies in the event that the signatory had previously made fraudulent representations to a financial institution using the holding company's principal investor as a named co-borrower. My father didn't have a lawyer look at it. He signed it in 3 places, initialed 4 more, and sent it back the same day. I forwarded it to Adaze that evening. She called me the next morning and said, I see what you did. I said, is it clean? She said, it's very clean. I need to tell you about the apartment because that's where things became real. The week after my father signed the documents, my mother called to ask when I was planning to vacate. She said it wasn't an eviction. She was very clear about that word, very emphatic that she would never use it, but that Theo and his fiancée needed to start planning and it would be helpful to have a timeline. She mentioned that Theo's fiancé had already looked at paint swatches for the bedroom. I was standing at my kitchen window when she said this, 14 floors up. The city laid out below me like a circuit board. I asked my mother who exactly owned my apartment. She said, well, you lease it, sweetheart. I said, I bought it 2 years ago, Mom. Silence. The building had gone condo in 2023. When the conversion happened, existing tenants had right of first purchase. I'd exercised that right. My unit was in my name, registered with the City of Toronto, fully paid. I had a deed. I had a key fob that worked on the parking garage. I had, as of 18 months ago, a rental income from the unit above mine that more than covered my property taxes. My mother said, "You, what?" I said, "I own it. I've owned it for 2 years." Another silence, longer this time. "You never told us." "No," I said, "I didn't." She hung up. I made more tea. It was raining outside, the kind of soft Toronto rain that makes the streetlights blur into orange smears, and I stood there watching it for a while. The mortgage file took another 6 weeks to resolve. Odyssey moved carefully, which was the right way to move. She contacted the lender directly, filed a formal dispute with my father's bank under FCAC guidelines, and submitted documentation showing that the co-borrower application had been made without my knowledge or consent. The income figures had been fabricated. The signature was not mine. A handwriting analysis confirmed it without much difficulty because my actual signature looks nothing like what appeared on that form. The lender froze the application. The property purchase fell through. My father's friend, the one with the berry development, was not pleased. My father called me 17 times in 3 days. I let every call go to voicemail. On the 4th day, he showed up at my building. The concierge, a man named Bernard, who has worked the desk since before I moved in and who, in my opinion, deserves a national honor, called upstairs to ask if I was expecting anyone. I said I wasn't. Bernard told my father I wasn't available. My father apparently stood in the lobby for 20 minutes before leaving. I watched him on the security camera feed from my laptop, sitting on my couch, eating crackers. He looked smaller than I remembered. There's a thing that happens when you stop absorbing the cost of other people's choices. A kind of pressure releases, like you've been walking slightly crooked your whole life because you've been bracing against something and then the something isn't there anymore and you have to relearn how to stand up straight. I went to dinner with my friend Sourse. We've known each other since our 2nd year at Waterloo. She's the godmother of her sister's kids and the most practical person I've ever met, and she asked me how I was doing, not how the situation was, how I was. I thought about it for a real minute. "I feel like I just finished a very long audit," I said. She laughed. "Did it balance?" "Almost perfectly." Almost, because there was still one thing unresolved. The joint account. The one with my grandmother's RESPER contribution, from which my parents had made 4 transfers over 2 years, totaling just over $6,200. Small in the grand scheme of things, large in terms of what it represented. I documented all 4 transfers, dates, amounts, account numbers. A daisy had it in the file. I withdrew the remaining balance, $41, and donated it to a youth literacy program in Scarborough that my grandmother had volunteered with before she died. I sent my parents a letter, not an email, a letter on paper, because I wanted it to be something they had to hold, that said in clear and simple language that I was aware of the transfers, that I had chosen not to pursue them legally, and that the account was now closed. The letter also said that any further contact regarding my property, my finances, or my living situation would be directed to my legal counsel. I signed it with my full name, which is Wren Calloway, and which has appeared on exactly 0 documents I didn't authorize. Theo called me the week after I sent the letter. He didn't call about the letter. I'm not sure my parents told him about it. He called because the wedding venue had doubled their deposit requirement due to a booking conflict, and could I help out just this once? I said, "Theo, I love you, but I can't be the family bank anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did something happen?" And I thought about that question, about how much was inside it and how little he actually knew, about the fact that he'd been the favorite his entire life and had never needed to build a bunker the way I had, and that it wasn't entirely his fault, but that it also wasn't my job to keep subsidizing a family structure that had always made me the load-bearing wall while pretending I was just a decoration. "A lot of things happened," I said, "over a long time. I should have talked to you sooner, but I need to take care of myself now." He said okay. He sounded confused and a little hurt, and I felt bad about the hurt part, but not bad enough to fix it in that moment. Some debts don't get settled in one conversation. The last thing I want to tell you happened on a Saturday in February, which in Toronto means the sky was the color of old dishwater and the wind chill was doing something genuinely hostile. I drove out to Mississauga, the first time I'd been back in 4 months, not to see my parents, but because the property next to their house had just come on the market. I know how that sounds. But here's the thing, I wasn't doing it to be petty. Or, I was doing it a little bit to be petty. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've been honest about everything else. But I was also doing it because the property was a reasonable investment, because I had recently registered a second company, Callaway Property Holdings, named for no one in particular, and because the numbers genuinely made sense. I had an agent named Deirdre, different Deirdre. This one wore very good boots and knew the Mississauga market the way I know network architecture. We walked through the property, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a yard that backed onto the same green belt as my parents' house. The previous owners had kept it well. The bones were good. On the way out, I stood at the back fence for a moment. My parents' kitchen window was lit up, yellow light, warm-looking from the outside, the way winter kitchens always look from a distance. My mother was at the sink. I could see the outline of her. I thought about the 9-year-old in the hospital, about the conference my father missed, about all the years I spent making myself smaller so I'd cost less, about the loan application with my forged signature, about the voicemails I never returned. And then I thought about my apartment on the 14th floor with the east-facing window and the morning light. I thought about Thérèse's laugh at dinner. I thought about Bernard the concierge. I thought about Ebard the concierge. I thought about Adaise's saying it's very clean and not precise, satisfied voice. I turned to my agent and said, I'd like to make an offer. She opened her tablet. What number are you thinking? I told her, it was a fair number, below asking but not insultingly so. The kind of number a serious buyer makes when they know the market and they're not in a hurry because they don't need to be. The offer was accepted 4 days later. My parents found out I was their new neighbor the way most people find out things in families, through a cousin who heard it from someone who saw the sold sign go up on a Sunday afternoon. My mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was long and complicated and included the sentence, I hope you're not doing this to prove a point. I'm not doing it to prove a point. I'm doing it because it's a good investment, and because I make my own decisions, and because the morning light in this part of the city is genuinely excellent and I spent a long time letting other people decide what I was worth. I don't do that anymore. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you stop waiting for people to see you clearly. I didn't arrive at that quiet easily. For most of my life, I thought if I just stayed patient enough, small enough, undemanding enough, my family would eventually notice the gap between who they assumed I was and who I had actually become. I kept the accounts separate, my real income, my property, my plans, not because I was ashamed, but because I'd learned early that visibility in my family had a cost. The moment someone knew you had something, they started calculating how much of it belonged to them. What I understand now is that every choice my father made, the forged signature, the inflated income figures on that application, the casual assumption that my apartment was just a resource waiting to be reassigned, each of those choices had a logic to it. The logic was, she'll absorb it, she always has. And for a long time, that logic was correct, because I let it be. Not out of weakness, but out of a misguided belief that endurance was the same thing as loyalty. It isn't. What actually protected me wasn't luck or timing. It was the years I'd spent building something real and private, keeping my records clean, understanding exactly what I owned and what I owed. When the mortgage broker called me about that fraudulent application, I wasn't panicked. I was prepared. Not because I'd seen it coming, but because I had made a habit of being ready, of knowing the numbers, of treating my own life with the same precision I brought to my work. That discipline, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just quietly makes you harder to exploit, that's what gave me options when options mattered. And Adese, I think about the first time I sat across from her and laid everything out, the transfers, the forged signature, the document I drafted with the clause in Section 11. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't soften it. She looked at the file and said, "What outcome do you want?" And I had an answer, because I'd thought it through. That clarity, knowing not just that something was wrong, but exactly what you want to do about it, and doing it without cruelty, that's something I had to build deliberately. It didn't come from anger. It came from spending a long time thinking carefully about what was actually mine and what I was willing to lose. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was the phone call with Theo, telling my brother, whom I genuinely love, who had no idea how much had been happening beneath the surface of our family, that I couldn't keep being the one who covered the gap. That conversation cost me something. I sat with the discomfort of it instead of rushing to fix it, because I've learned that not every hurt is yours to repair immediately. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stay steady and let people catch up. I don't have a tidy lesson to hand you. What I have is this. The morning I got the call that my offer on the Mississauga property had been accepted, I made coffee and stood at my east-facing window and felt, for the first time in a long while, completely level. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just level, like the books finally balanced. That feeling wasn't handed to me. I built it, one quiet decision at a time.